This is Dholera. It's the area in western Gujarat that's set to become the beating heart of India's semiconductor industry. Now, India's first fab, due to come online next year, is a joint effort between the Tata Group and Taiwan's PSMC. It comes hot on the heels of another India-Taiwan venture between Vedanta and Foxconn, which failed to get off the ground. Now, India and Taiwan's governments both see Taiwanese chip makers as key to India's ambitions. But are Taiwan semiconductor companies willing to risk venturing into this uncharted territory? I'm Divya Gopalan, and you're watching Connected on TaiwanPlus. To discuss Taiwan's role in India's semiconductor ambitions, we are joined by Ritika Passi, a geo-economic analyst and 2024 Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan Fellow, speaking to us from Delhi. And from the South Indian city of Bengaluru, we're joined by Pranay Kotasthane, Deputy Director at the Indian think tank Takshashila Institution, and he also co-authored the book When Chips Are Down, a deep dive into a global crisis. Thank you both so much for being part of the program. And I'm going to start with you, Pranay. Dholera is the home state of India's Prime Minister. Where is it now in terms of India's semiconductor ambitions?
So right now, the things that are happening in Dholera, it's not just Dholera, there is also Sanand, which is in Gujarat. So a bunch of things are happening in Dholera. Is the construction of the fab is in progress. A lot of things are going there because it's literally a new special industrial region where water provision, electricity provision, all that needs to be done right from the ground up. So all that work is happening as we speak. It will take 2-3 years for a fab to come up. In the meanwhile, close to Dholera, as I said, there's another place called Sanand where a bunch of other OSAT plants are coming up. And there, obviously, OSAT plants, which is outsourced assembly and test, requires less amount of capital investment compared to a fab. So that is happening with much greater speed. And you will see some of the first outputs coming out of it this end of this year or early next year.
Ritika, talk to us about the Tata PSMC cooperation we're seeing. How's that going to work?
All right, so this is an incredibly significant joint venture that has happened between PSMC and Tata because it establishes the first commercial semiconductor fab in India that'll begin producing chips by the end of 2026. And essentially, PSMC is acting as a guide and marks India's entry into the commercial semiconductor business. How? Because PSMC is helping the design and the construction of this fab. It's ensuring adherence to quality standards, to safety, to sustainability. It is sharing a broad portfolio of technologies, of licensed technologies that will allow India to produce chips. And these are mostly going to be 28 nanometers and above. And they will involve a range of chips from power management, microcontroller chips to logic chips that can be used in sectors that are of interest to India's domestic emerging and burgeoning domestic electronics industry, automotive industry, computing, wireless communication, data storage, and of course, AI. As well as these two aspects, PSMC is also going to be providing engineering support to facilitate the successful transfer and implementation of these licensed technologies.
I'm going to stop you there and go to Pranay on that, on this whole idea of this engagement. Now, I mentioned the Vedanta and Foxconn partnership that did not take off. I don't want to necessarily go into exactly what happened, as there are many external factors, but Pranay, can you give us a sense of what perhaps Taiwan companies are concerned about when entering this Indian ecosystem?
Right. So just a broad point, actually the Taiwanese firm PSMC is not the first in the semiconductor landscape because Micron was the one which started an OSAT plant first. But Taiwanese firm PSMC is the first one in the fabrication landscape and there's no other player. Now, the important question for us is why is it that even though Taiwan has a leadership in OSAT space like ASE, Power Tech, etc., why aren't they investing in India, right? rights? And that's the heart of the question that you also asked. So some of the things that I have been looking at on the OSAT plants, Taiwanese firms have requested for changes in labor laws, for example, because Indian labor laws currently allow 8-hour shifts. So there are 3 shifts in a day, whereas many Taiwanese firms are used to working at 2 shifts, which are 12 hours each. So just because this is this segment really runs on wafer thin margins, and you can't run it with really multiple shifts, multiple handoffs in the same day, etc. So they have been working for that. Some states have tried, but they have not yet been successful. So this is one constraint. The second constraint is on policy consistency. So a lot of this investment, as we know, it starts in a year and it takes 4 or 5 years for that investment to start bearing fruit. So which means you need to have full assurance in the government's policy system, in the government's tax system. And that is again been a concern in the past. And probably that's what the government of India and Taiwan have been talking about to address that. The third issue is about trade and tariff barriers. So already the tariff rates were high in India, but the Indian government has been proactive on this, and it understands that for something like an OSAT, you will need to do a lot of imports to do some exports. So in that sense, they are willing to give exemptions and reduce tariffs for the equipment that will be required to make or assemble chips in India. So that is still a work in progress, and I see that positive things might happen there. Finally, on the design segment, I think the main concern is the ease of movement of capital. If because we should understand that collaboration between companies will only happen if there are complementarities. Governments can only help to a certain extent. So complementarities in the design segment can happen if Taiwanese firms are able to get Indian engineering talent and they are able to invest here. And for that, you need good capital flows, which are easier to happen. It is easier for an investor to put money in India, to take money out of India. So these are some of the constraints.
Right. You've laid that out very nicely. So Ritika, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, so a couple of other ones that I think are also important to point out, one being the skill shortage. So yes, India absolutely accounts for anywhere between 19% to 25% of the chip design talent around the world. Yet, when it comes to semiconductor design, engineering, and technical capacities, there India faces a shortage. And while the government has set up plans and is initiating and trying to sign agreements for labor mobility and for technical training programs, there is an issue of retention. Once Indian engineers go abroad, they see better prospects in Taiwan or in the US or elsewhere. And so there's that aspect as well to mention.
Very interesting. Let's take it back to Dholera for a moment by looking at the numbers for what's to be India's first ever fab. The $11 billion Dholera project will have a capacity to produce 50,000 wafer starts a month. And there'll be 28 nanometer high performance computer chips designed for electric vehicles and defense and telecom sectors. Now, the first chip is expected to roll out by 2026. Now, Ritika, can you give us an idea of how this chip will, or who it will service once that starts rolling out?
The important thing to recognize is this is often called out, by the way, as a concern among, for example, Taiwanese companies. Where is India going to get the market from once it starts making these chips? It's important to recognize that India is also investing in downstream, in creating these markets. So as I mentioned, automotive. India is the 5th largest automobile market, and it's expected to become the 3rd by 2030, especially given EV demand. India is also the world's 2nd largest telecommunications market. It has the 3rd highest number of internet users. And as we know, India is also progressing. While it lost out on 2G, 3G, 4G, it is actively looking to put in place 5G and even begin thinking about 6G. So there is scope for an internal demand. But there's also another interesting thing that I'd like to highlight. So news came out last year that apparently Tesla and Tata have entered into an agreement. Now, while no official agreement was given by either Tata or Tesla, the fact that this year reports have come out that Tesla and Tata have been engaging, and Tata companies are now increasingly becoming suppliers to Tesla. So they give weight to this news report that came out last year that Tesla could be a potential buyer of these chips that are going to be fabricated by this joint venture between Tata and PSMC.
Very interesting. Pranay, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
The stated timeline is December 2026 is when the first chip will come out. This is what the Minister of Electronics and Information Technology in India has said. I would say that it will take some more time. Maybe 2027 is a reasonable time to expect this Dholera plant to be up and running.
Mm-hmm. You wrote the book When the Chips Are Down, a deep dive into a global crisis. And Ritika's just now mentioned about the potential buyers of these chips when that comes online. I want to ask you about then India's place in the global order, in the semiconductor global order, Pranay, where you see India now positioning itself, especially once these chips start production and we see production ramping up in other areas.
No, that's a great question. So the way India is looking at it is India's journey will be very different from, let's say, the journey of Taiwan or Singapore or South Korea, because in India, the talent and experience is in the design segment and not so much in the manufacturing and the assembly segment. Assembly segment is something which we do have a comparative advantage in because it is a labor intensive segment and India has lower labor costs. So that's why you're seeing 4 OSAT plants already being built up and they'll start producing chips soon. And because we have the comparative advantage there, I don't think there will be much problem for India to start producing chips with high yields and make that realize the revenue from those productions. But fab is a different game. It will take a lot more time for India to get good at production of chips and fabrication. So that is still a challenge. The third, what India's focus has been is focus on the design segment where India really has a comparative advantage. Ritika mentioned nearly 20% of the design talent. So the key area that the government is looking at is, can you now make Indian intellectual property from the fact that you have a lot of design engineers? Can they make Indian firms? Can they make new products and architectures which are Indian, right? So that's sort of the way India is looking at it. In the initial stages of this semiconductor design plan, probably the government thought it could get the likes of TSMC, etc. in, because the first stage of this semiconductor schemes had provided higher incentives if you were doing very cutting edge chip investment in India. But the government realized within a year, less than a year, that TSMC is being chased by everyone else.
And that is something I do want to explore in our next segment. But before we do that, Ritika, I feel you wanted to jump in there.
Yes, I did. I want to go back to, again, this joint venture between PSMC and Tata, because what I've realized is here in the media in India, there's a different conversation that is happening compared to what is the conversation in Taiwan and how they view this joint venture, right? And so what I have come to understand is that, yes, OSAT facilities aside, when it comes to actual semiconductor fab chip making facilities, this is a proof of concept. It is a proof of concept to see whether India can deliver the ecosystem and the productive forces that are necessary to actually produce chips. Whether this strategy of having a licensing model, licensing intellectual property, is enough to give India a fillip, to give India a springboard to develop its own chip manufacturing industry, and what are the best practices that will be passed on from PSMC to Tata? Does it open the door for more India-Taiwanese engagement, or is this just going to be a one-off? And in the event that it is a one-off, is that such a bad deal?
And you've opened the door there, Ritika, for me to bring in an understanding of how India can learn from Taiwan's semiconductor evolution. And we spoke to Eric Pang, the director of Taiwan Chamber of Commerce in Delhi. He also worked in Taiwan semiconductor sector in the early days. Take a listen.
Taiwan journey is full of the valuable insight. And first, its long-term commitment. Taiwan took a decade to build its leadership, so there was no rush. So Indian should embrace that the same strategy passion. And second, Taiwan have institutional innovation. Taiwan create ITRI, which acts as a bridge of government and academies and industry. He allowed Taiwan to internalize R&D, so incubate startups and commercialize technology quickly. So Indian need a similar central research commercialization engine. And third, Taiwan focus on specification. TSMC didn't try to design the chip. It focused on being the best foundry in the world. So Indians should pick this strength, mature node and manufacturing, trust chip production. So OSAT and go deep, not wide.
Pranay, Eric Pang mentioned a few points there, but from your point of view, as you've studied how other semiconductor industries have evolved or the strategy behind them, what is it that you feel that India, for all that he's mentioned, that India should really be focusing on at this point in time?
Yeah, I think I agree with the observation that OSAT, as I already mentioned, that will be a comparative advantaged segment. So it's good to double down on that, and that's what the government is doing. But there's the other segment, the design segment. I think Taiwan has a lot to gain from that segment because, like he mentioned, the Taiwanese model was to focus on contract manufacturing and get really good at it, which means that there are a lot of things for Taiwan to do on the design segment where India brings the expertise, right? You will require huge amounts of engineering talent to get new architectures, new designs, and that's what India does better, right? So in fact, there are lots of opportunities of collaboration where, maybe joint funds or joint commercial projects offering grants for partnerships between Taiwanese and Indian semiconductor companies might also benefit Taiwan on the other end. As I said, complementarities are important. No company will do something for India just because for the good of it, right? It's they will do it because if they see some gain in it. And for example, MediaTek, which is a big Taiwanese semiconductor fabless firm, does have a significant presence in Bangalore. And similarly, there might be many other things that can happen on the design segment. So yeah, design and OSAT will be the two focus areas for the Indian government, and Fab will be, as Ritika said, this is the first attempt.
Ritika, your thoughts?
Yes, I think how critical Taiwan and Taiwanese experience is to India's semiconductor ambitions, we have to qualify that. I'm going to make 2 points. First is that TSMC would not have gotten off the ground without Philips, the Dutch company that at one point used to be a semiconductor that used to make semiconductors. Without Philips having transferred the production technology and licensed intellectual property in exchange for a stake in the company, it wouldn't have become the contract manufacturer that it is today without a ready client base in the US. China would not have been able to domesticate semiconductor for itself without external support. For example, by one estimate, half of China's SMIC's startup capital was apparently provided by US investors. Another example, SMIC became what it became by the end of 2000s. I think it was a couple of years behind when it came to technology. It was mostly on the back of foreign trained talent. And that's the first point I want to make. So I think it's clear that India cannot do it without the countries and the companies that have gotten it right. But I think there's also equally that point that, the audio bite, the guest speaker, he mentioned this point about urgency, that Taiwan took its time. The thing is that at the moment, we don't know how much time India considers for itself to have. To paraphrase the head of Invest India, if Taiwan chooses not to partner with India, India will do it anyway. But it will be far harder and far more difficult, and yes, it will take longer. And I think this then automatically leads to that question that, everybody wants TSMC, as Pranay mentioned, but does TSMC want you back? I would just broaden that scope and say, okay, what about Taiwanese willingness and interest to invest in India?
On that note, I'm going to make a quick throw to our viewers. So, can India become the next global chip producer, and can it catch up with China? Do click the video beside me for a discussion on India-Taiwan semiconductor collaborations, its prospects and pitfalls, and subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell if you don't want to miss more stories on tech and finance from Taiwan.